The kingdom of Greyhaven had once been bright, proud, and loud with bells, markets, and marching banners, but now it lay under demon flags that snapped in the cold wind above broken citadels. Ash drifted through the streets like gray snow, and the old marble bridges were cracked where black iron chains had been nailed into place. In the middle of that ruined capital, beneath a cathedral with a shattered dome, a young woman named Eira opened her eyes inside a secret chamber of stone and glass. Eira was a woman with silver hair, pale skin, and tired blue eyes, and she wore a torn ranger cloak over black travel clothes that had seen too many nights on the road. She had come to the capital because she wanted one thing above all else: to stop the demon rule and protect the last people still hiding in the lower districts. She was not a famous knight, and she was not born with a crown, but she was stubborn, careful, and brave in the quiet way that matters most. The danger was clear from the start, because the demon throne already controlled the city, and if Eira failed, the last free fires in Greyhaven would be stamped out forever. Deep in the chamber stood a sealed weapon altar, and on it rested a long black hilt wrapped in stormglass threads, waiting for the one person who could wake it. That weapon was called the Ward Blade, and it was no normal sword at all, because it was the command key for a living mech hidden beneath the cathedral. Long ago, the people of Greyhaven had forged that mech from cathedral iron, stormglass, and prayer metal, so it could stand like a giant guardian and defend the kingdom walls. But the mech had been betrayed from within, and that betrayal split it into 5 war forms before the kingdom fell. The old record said the fragments still lived, sleeping in separate places, each one waiting for the right hand to call it back. Eira did not fully understand the warning when she touched the blade, but the moment her fingers closed around it, the chamber shook and blue lightning ran across the floor. A deep voice echoed from the altar, and the sealed weapon answered to her blood. Hidden doors opened below the cathedral, and stairways lit by pale fire led her into the lost heart of Greyhaven. There she found the first sign of the mech, a giant armored hand the size of a wagon, folded like a sleeping fist inside a vault of rusted chains. The sight made her breath catch because she finally understood what was at stake. If the mech could rise again, the kingdom might stand a chance. If not, the demon lord Vance would keep the throne forever. Vance was the ruler of the demon court, a man with black hair, red armor, and a face that always looked calm before violence. He wanted Greyhaven not only because it had already fallen, but because the living mech could lock his dark gates across the world and give his empire a lasting seal of power. He feared the Ward Blade because it could break that seal and call the old guardian back to full strength. Vance did not send his armies blindly either, because he understood the fragments were scattered, and he meant to trap each one before Eira could gather them. Beside him served Lady Raven, a woman with long black hair, pale skin, and a smooth silver gown shaped like armor. She was the leader of the raven-winged sorcerers, and she wanted the fragments because she believed the cursed weapon could raise her own power above even Vance if she delivered it to him at the right time. She smiled like a friend and spoke like a helper, but her kindness was only a mask. When Eira left the cathedral vault with the Ward Blade in hand, both Vance and Raven already knew she had awakened. Their hunters moved at once. Infernal knights in dark helms rode through the streets on iron beasts, and raven sorcerers spread across the rooftops with black wings made of spell smoke. Eira had to flee through the lower tunnels, where the first fragment waited beyond the old floodgates in a drowned training hall. There she found the mech form called the Sentinel Arm, a massive steel arm with a shield built into the forearm, still chained to a stone ring below the waterline. Eira lifted the Ward Blade, spoke the binding words she somehow knew, and the arm rose out of the dark with a roar of steam. The first warform answered her, and the chamber shook as the battle began. The first clash came fast because a squad of infernal knights broke through the flooded hall before Eira could even steady her hands. Their leader, a scarred man named Thorn, wore horned armor and carried a burning spear. He was loyal to Vance, and he wanted to drag Eira back alive so the demon lord could study the blade and use her as bait for the rest of the fragments. Eira had never fought knights like these before, but she was quick, and the sentinel arm moved at her command like a giant shield that understood her fear. It blocked the spear strike, drove one knight back, and slammed the stone floor hard enough to send water rushing across the hall. Eira ran between broken pillars, her cloak snapping behind her, while Lady Raven watched from above on a cracked balcony, smiling as if the fight had already been won. Yet the mech arm held, and when Eira placed the Ward Blade against its core socket, the fragment woke fully and folded into a living armor brace around her. The power felt heavy, strange, and warm at the same time. It was not just a machine, it was a guardian that remembered being loved. That feeling changed Eira because for the first time she did not think of herself as a lost survivor. She thought of herself as someone chosen to bring something back. But the victory did not last long because Raven sent a storm of black feathers and sleep ash into the hall, forcing Eira to retreat through the lower tunnels before the knights could pin her down. She escaped with the first fragment, but the enemy now knew her path. Her search for the second fragment led her across the blighted western fields, where dead crops leaned under a sky full of bruised clouds and broken watchtowers marked the old border. There she met a man named Luke, a village scout with brown hair, a rough coat, and a battered crossbow. Luke had been hiding families in cellar homes and bringing food through old hunting trails, and he wanted the same thing Eira wanted, a world where children could sleep without demon patrols at the door. He was cautious at first because many strangers had lied to him, but he saw the ward blade and understood the truth. Together they crossed the field of stone markers where the second war form had been buried after the betrayal, the forged legs, two giant armored legs built for crushing charges and heavy defense. The betrayal that shattered the mech was now becoming clearer, because the old records in Luke factually showed that the kingdom had once trusted a council member named Victor, a court mage with white hair and a sharp smile, who had opened the city gates to demon forces during the final siege. Victor was not dead and he was not forgotten. He had become one of Vance's highest servants and he had helped hide the fragment locations so no one could reunite the Guardian. When Victor appeared on the battlefield in a cloak full of red runes, he made the truth worse because he knew Eira from her childhood and called her by name like an old friend. That was the first real twist, and it hit hard. Victor had once trained Eira in temple drills before the fall, which meant the betrayal was not distant history. It had touched her own life. He told her the mech was dangerous, that the kingdom had been destroyed because people were foolish enough to trust holy steel, and that she should hand the ward blade to Vance so order could be restored. Eira almost froze, but Luke shouted her back into motion, and together they fought through the cursed fog. The forged legs rose at her command, heavy and bright with blue fire, and Victor had to retreat into the haze when the new war form slammed the ground and shattered his spell circle. By the time Eira reached the ruined capital again, she had 3 fragments, because the next one had been hidden inside the old watch chapel on the east ridge, and the 4th was pulled from a broken siege yard beneath the city walls. Each recovery made the ward blade stronger, but also made Eira feel a strange pressure behind her eyes, like the mech was speaking inside her thoughts. She started to understand that the weapon was cursed for a reason. It did not just command the Guardian, it asked for trust, memory, and pain, and every fragment carried part of the old betrayal with it. Luke stayed by her side, and so did a healer named Sarah, a woman with red hair, gentle hands, and a strong will, who had been caring for the hidden families in the catacombs. Sarah wanted to save lives, not win glory, and she warned Eira that the final fragment rested inside the old throne tower, the one place the demon lord had twisted into a nest of spells. That tower was also where the 5th and last war form lay hidden, the crown core, the heart of the mech, and the source of its full power. When Eira entered the tower, she found Victor waiting with Raven and Thorn, and all 3 understood the same truth. If the crown core returned to Eira, the Guardian could rise in full, but if Vance took it first, the mech would become a cage for the whole kingdom. The demon lord wanted that cage because he feared rebellion more than fire. He did not want to destroy Greyhaven completely. He wanted to freeze it under his rule forever. That was why the final battle mattered so much, and that was why the storm overhead began to split open the sky. Lightning tore through the clouds above the capital, the tower windows exploded inward, and Eira finally reached the chamber where the crown core waited like a sleeping heart of iron and light. She lifted the ward blade, felt the curse wake fully through her arm, and called the mech to rise, even as Vance stepped forward with his infernal guard closing in from all sides. The chamber shook as the crown core opened, and the 4 recovered war forms locked together in the air, one by one, around the glowing center. Eira stood in the middle of the storm and understood the cost at last, because the mech did not answer with strength alone. It answered with a choice. To awaken it fully, she had to offer it her fear and her trust, and if she failed to keep control, the Guardian would consume everything it touched, including the capital itself. Vance smiled then because he believed that choice would break her. He ordered Thorn to strike, Raven to blind the room with black wings of spellfire, and Victor to speak the old betrayal aloud to crush what was left of Eira's doubt. But Eira was not the same frightened girl who had entered the cathedral vault. She had seen the hidden families, the ruined fields, the loyal scout, the healer, and the cost of every fragment. She knew the mech was not just a weapon of power. It was a promise that people could stand again. So she did the one thing the cursed blade had wanted from the beginning. She trusted the Guardian without surrendering herself to it. The 5 war forms fused into the full cathedral mech, a towering figure of iron, stormglass, and blue lightning, and the entire tower lit up like a second dawn. The demon knights were driven back. Raven lost her spell when the storm broke her wings of smoke. Thorn was forced to retreat with the rest of the guard. Vance himself staggered under the blast of power, but he did not fall, and when the smoke cleared, Eira saw him still standing beneath the torn sky, staring at the reborn Guardian with cold rage. The capital had not been fully saved yet, and the war was not over. But for the first time since the kingdom fell, the demon throne looked afraid. Eira gripped the ward blade, the giant mech waiting behind her, and she stepped toward the broken doors of the tower, ready for what came next. Greyhaven had become a city of broken stone and uneasy silence, where ash drifted through the streets like gray snow and torn banners snapped in the cold wind. Above the ruined capital, the sky still glowed with storm light from the power that had just awakened, and every shattered archway seemed to watch the same impossible sight. The living Guardian stood once again, half machine and half old miracle, with blue light pulsing through its iron joints like a huge sleeping heart. Eira knew the city was not safe yet, and the war was not finished, because Vance still stood outside the tower with anger in his eyes and greed in his mind. He wanted the crown core below the cathedral tower because the core could command the Guardian, crush the last resistance, and give him full rule over Greyhaven. He was not fighting only for pride. He believed that if he controlled the city hearts, then every rebel, every survivor, and every hope of freedom would bend to his will. That was why he came here, and that was why Eira had to keep moving. She was a young woman with silver hair, pale skin, tired blue eyes, and a lean body that had been worn thin by too many battles. Her torn dark ranger cloak hung from her shoulders, and her black travel clothes were dusty with soot, but her face still held a hard and stubborn focus. The cursed ward blade rested in her hands, its black hilt wrapped in glowing stormglass threads, and it hummed like a warning each time she tightened her grip. Behind her, the reborn Guardian had already taken one step toward war, but it could not save Greyhaven alone. Eira had to go deeper, find the truth, and reach the heart below the tower before Vance did. She glanced back only once, saw Luke moving with his crossbow ready, saw Sarah holding her healer satchel close, and saw that both of them were still alive because they had trusted her. That trust mattered more than fear, and it pushed her through the broken doors. The tower interior was dark, tall, and cold, with cracked marble floors and twisted metal ribs rising along the walls like the bones of some dead giant. Eira led the way through a hall filled with fallen statues and broken lanterns, while Luke followed close behind with alert green eyes and a cautious, loyal look. Luke was a man with brown hair, tan skin, and a rough brown coat, and he stayed quiet because he understood that loud voices could bring more enemies. Sarah moved beside him with red hair, fair skin, and soft brown eyes, her simple healer robe and gray shawl dusted with stone powder, but her hands stayed steady because wounded people had depended on her all day. She had not come for glory, she had come because she believed every life in Greyhaven still mattered, even after the kingdom fell. The trio had no time to rest because the tower had already begun to shift around them. Iron plates slid into place with deep groans, sealing some passages and opening others, as if the building itself was alive and trying to guide them toward a trap. Then a voice drifted from the upper dark, smooth and cold and filled with simple pride. Lady Raven stepped into view on a stair platform above them, and she made an immediate impression. She was a woman with long black hair, pale skin, and striking gray eyes, wearing a smooth silver gown with dark armor accents and raven feather decorations that caught the dim light. Her cold, superior smile showed no fear at all, only patient amusement. She was not a random servant of the throne. She was Vance's inner advisor, a noble schemer who wanted power for herself, and she had followed him because she believed the Crown Corps could let her shape the future after the war. She liked control more than loyalty, and she trusted no one unless it served her. Beside her stood Victor, a man with white hair, sharp features, and cold gray eyes, his dark mage cloak covered in red rune patterns that glowed softly when he raised his hands. He was smug, clever, and deeply dangerous because he did not serve Vance out of fear. He served only the result he wanted, which was to study the Guardian, take its core magic, and turn the whole city into a tool for his own design. Lady Raven looked down at Eira and spoke with calm contempt, saying that the girl had won one small clash but had already walked into the larger trap. Then Victor snapped his fingers, and the hall behind Eira sealed shut with a heavy crash. The tower had closed its mouth. Greyhaven now belonged to whoever reached the core first. The first attack came from the side passages, where iron sentries unfolded from hidden panels and rushed forward with heavy limbs and red eyes. Eira moved before fear could slow her, swinging the ward blade in a clean arc that sent blue sparks across the floor. She had never been a soldier by training. She had learned survival one step at a time, by running, hiding, and striking when the moment was right. Now she trusted the blade in her hands, even though part of her still hated how it pulsed like a living curse. The blade answered her will, and with each command the Stormglass threads brightened, as if the weapon was waking up to remember its purpose. Luke fired his crossbow from behind a shattered column, striking the joints of one sentry and forcing it to lurch sideways. Sarah pulled a wounded guard away from falling debris, then pressed a glowing herb bundle to his arm and kept him breathing long enough to crawl to safety. Her courage mattered because she did not fight only with healing. She fought by refusing to let pain break the people around her. Above them, Lady Raven watched with a faint smile, as if she were enjoying a private game, while Victor shaped red runes in the air and muttered that the Guardian should never have awakened at all. Then the floor split open between the fighters and a deep chamber yawned below. From that darkness rose Thorn, a broad-shouldered man with short brown hair, a scarred face, and horned infernal knight armor traced with glowing red lines. He carried a burning spear that lit the chamber in angry orange light, and he moved with raw force, like a man who believed strength solved every problem. Thorn was Vance's frontline champion, and he hated Eira because she had made the throne look weak in front of the city. He wanted to crush her quickly, not out of cruelty alone, but because he thought fear would restore order. He slammed the spear into the floor, and a wave of heat drove everyone backward. Luke stumbled, Sarah shielded her face, and Eira nearly lost her footing. Yet when Thorn charged, Eira did not run. She met him head-on, ducked under the burning spear, and struck the armor seam at his side. The clash rang through the tower, sharp and bright, and Thorn was forced to retreat one step, then another, his armor smoking at the edges. That tiny victory cost Eira dearly, because Victor used the opening to cast a binding circle around her feet. Dark red lines spread like chains across the stone, and Eira felt her muscles tighten as the spell tried to lock her in place. She gritted her teeth and glanced toward the silent guardian outside the tower, remembering the way it had answered her call. If the mech could awaken once, it could awaken again, but only if she survived long enough to reach the core chamber below. The next truth arrived like a blade in the dark. Lady Raven descended the stairs, no longer smiling, and told Eira that the tower was never only a prison for the crown core, it was also a lock. Long ago, Greyhaven built the Guardian to protect the kingdom, but the machine had been sealed with a command weapon because its power was too dangerous for any ordinary ruler. The ward blade was not merely cursed. It was the only key that could open the Guardian, awaken its missing parts, and command the full machine without destroying the city. That was why Vance wanted it, and that was why the blade had called to Eira since the first moment she touched it. It had chosen her because her will was strong enough to resist the corruption inside it. This revelation stunned her, because she had believed the blade was only a burden she had inherited by accident. Now she understood that someone had hidden the truth for a reason. The old rulers of Greyhaven had feared the same thing she feared now, that anyone cruel enough to control the Guardian could turn it into a weapon against its own people. Victor had known this too, and he had hidden records showing that the crown core could not be removed safely while the Guardian slept. It had to be awakened in stages, first the sentinel arm, then the forge legs, and finally the core itself. If the process failed, the tower would collapse inward and take half the capital with it. If Vance succeeded, the city would become a cage. Eira looked at Luke and Sarah, and in their faces she saw the same hard truth. They were not here for victory alone anymore. They were here to keep the city from becoming a graveyard of stone and steel. With a deep breath, Eira broke the binding circle by driving the ward blade into the floor and sending a burst of blue force outward. The spell shattered, the tower shook. Far below, something enormous shifted in answer. A deep metallic sound rolled up through the stone, and the hidden chamber opened at last. Through the crack in the floor, Eira saw the glowing crown core, bright and alive within its dark iron housing, pulsing like the heart of some sleeping giant. Lady Raven stepped back at once, and for the first time her cold smile faded. Even Victor took a cautious step away from the edge. They had all wanted power, but now they understood the same terrible fact. The Guardian was waking faster than any of them had planned. Eira raised the blade, feeling its Stormglass threads warm against her palm, and she understood that the next choice would decide not just the tower, but everything still standing in Greyhaven. Then, from the lower chamber, a voice that was not quite human answered her call, and the story moved into a new and more dangerous dark. Greyhaven lay under a storm-dark sky, and the broken cathedral tower rose above the ash like a warning that refused to fade. Shattered marble bridges hung over empty streets, demon banners snapped in the wind, and cold blue light leaked from cracks deep in the stone. Inside the tower, the air felt tight and old, as if the whole ruin had been holding its breath for years. Eira stood near the edge of the upper chamber, her torn dark ranger cloak fluttering behind her, her silver hair catching the dim light, and her tired blue eyes fixed on the black hilt in her hand. She was lean, tired, and stubborn, and she cared about one thing more than anything else now, which was keeping Greyhaven from falling into the wrong hands. Beside her stood Luke, a cautious man with brown hair, tanned skin, and alert green eyes, ready with his crossbow but more useful for warning than for fighting. Sarah, a woman with red hair, fair skin, and soft brown eyes, held her gray shawl close and watched everyone with the steady care of a healer who knew fear but refused to let it rule her. Across from them, Vance waited in polished red-black demon armor, his black hair neat, his sharp red eyes calm, and his cruel expression almost relaxed, as if the tower itself belonged to him. Lady Raven, a woman with long black hair, pale skin, and striking gray eyes, stood with a silver gown and dark armor accents that made her look like a queen carved from ice. Thorn, broad-shouldered and scarred, gripped his burning spear with both hands, his short brown hair wet with sweat and his stance full of anger. Victor, pale and smug, watched with cold gray eyes from the shadows of his rune-covered cloak, already thinking 3 steps ahead. All of them had come for power, but the problem now was plain and terrible. The Guardian below was waking faster than any of them expected, and if it rose fully without control, it would tear the tower apart and leave Greyhaven open to ruin. A sound rose from the lower chamber, and it was not fully human. It was a voice made of metal strain, deep air, and something ancient that had learned how to speak through broken bones and gears. The voice asked who had touched the heart of the sleeping giant. Eira felt the ward blade warm in her palm, the Stormglass threads glowing like trapped lightning, and she knew the weapon was not just an armament. It was a command key made to wake the living mech hidden under the cathedral and force its pieces to answer. That meant the blade was both a promise and a curse, because any person strong enough to use it might also become its prisoner. Vance smiled when he heard the voice, and that smile made Luke tighten his grip on the crossbow. Vance wanted the crown core because he wanted the power to command the mech and the city with it, and he believed strength should belong to the one willing to take it. Lady Raven wanted the same power, but for a colder reason, because she believed Greyhaven needed a ruler who could end chaos through fear and perfect control. Thorn wanted the mech as a weapon to crush every enemy in his path, and his simple hunger for force made him easy to read and dangerous to trust. Victor wanted the crown core for knowledge because he believed the core held old rune laws that could make him master of both magic and machine. Eira understood all of this in one sharp moment, and she also understood something else. The voice below was not a guardian waiting to obey. It was a mind awakening, and it already knew it was being hunted. Then the lower chamber doors slammed inward with a blast of blue air, and the whole tower shivered from the shock. Eira moved first, because hesitation would have been the same as surrender. She stepped toward the stairwell, lifted the ward blade, and felt the Stormglass threads pull at her hand like a living nerve. The blade flashed once, and far below, a giant shape answered. A heavy metallic arm rose from the darkness, iron plates scraping stone, chained joints groaning, and blue energy lines waking under layers of rust. The sentinel arm was enormous, shaped like a cathedral iron limb with a built-in shield, and it moved with the slow force of a mountain beginning to turn. Behind it, deeper in the chamber, another shape stirred. The forge legs pushed against their restraints, bronze joints flexing, blue fire veins brightening, and reinforced knee plates locking into place with a deep clang that shook dust from the ceiling. Sarah gasped and backed away, but Luke caught her elbow and kept her steady. Victor muttered that the structure was stable enough if no one forced it to move too fast, which was the kind of lie he used when he wanted to sound useful. Lady Raven stepped closer to the stairwell, her gray eyes sharp with greed and calculation, and she said the crown heart must be close now. Her voice was smooth, but her plan was clear. She intended to use the tower panic to claim the crown core before the others could stop her. Vance saw the same opportunity, and for the first time his calm expression changed into something sharper. He did not want to share power, not with Lady Raven, not with anyone. Thorn laughed once, a hard and ugly sound, and said that if the giant was waking, then they should send it toward the city gate and let it smash their enemies for them. Eira heard all of them, and she felt the truth of the moment settle on her shoulders. Greyhaven was not just in danger from the Guardian. Greyhaven was in danger from the people who wanted to use the Guardian. The first true reveal came when the voice spoke again, and this time it used Eira's name. It did not say her name as a threat, it said it as if it knew her from long ago. The voice told her that the crown core would not answer greed, and that the tower had been built to keep the core from the hands of men and women who would break the city trying to own it. Luke looked at Eira in shock because he could hear the same thing she could. Sarah frowned because she had never heard of the Tower Keeper speaking through the stone before. Victor went very still, and that stillness was more frightening than anger because he had just learned that someone else held deeper knowledge than he did. Eira demanded to know who was speaking, and the answer came with a slow mechanical echo that rolled up through the chamber like thunder underground. The voice said it was the Guardian of Greyhaven, bound to the living mech and sworn to protect the crown core until the rightful hand returned. Then came the twist that changed everything. The voice said the rightful hand had never been a king, a warlord, or a rune master. It had been the first tower builder, Eira bloodline, and the old records had been hidden on purpose because the city lords feared that the Guardian would choose a descendant over them. Eira felt the room tilt in her mind. She had expected danger, but not inheritance. She had expected a weapon, but not a family burden. This meant her life had been moving toward this tower long before she knew Greyhaven existed as a threat. The Guardian was not waking for power alone, it was waking because it recognized her. Lady Raven saw the change in Eira's face, and the cold smile that followed was small but sharp. She knew now that Eira was more than a rival. She was a K. That knowledge split the room. Vance moved first, not to help but to strike the moment of confusion. He lunged toward Eira with a dark rush of armor and cape, trying to force the ward blade out of her hand before the Guardian could lock onto her fully. Thorn followed with a heavy forward surge, burning spear raised, ready to overwhelm anyone who blocked his path. Victor cast a ring of red runes that flashed against the stone, trying to pin the mech fragments in place long enough to reach the lower chamber. Lady Raven did not charge. She simply stepped back, watched the others collide, and measured which side would leave her best position to win. Luke fired a crossbow bolt into the floor before Vance could close the distance, not to wound, but to break his line and give Eira room. Sarah moved to Luke's side and shouted for everyone to stop acting like fools, because the chamber was about to collapse under the strain of all that power. Eira did not waste the opening. She lifted the ward blade higher and pressed her free hand to the stone wall, trusting a memory she did not fully understand. The blade answered with a bright pulse, and the sentinel arm shifted. Its giant shield angled outward, blocking Vance and Thorn from the stairwell. The forge legs locked below with a heavy grind, and the floor steadied just enough to keep the chamber from splitting apart, but control came with pain. Eira felt the weapon pull through her arm and into her chest as if the tower itself was testing whether she could carry the burden without breaking. She nearly dropped to one knee, but she stayed upright. That mattered because the Guardian had seen her resolve, and the voice below grew calmer, as if it had finally found the person it had been waiting for. The chamber darkened, and a ring of blue light rose from the lower level like a waking eye. Through the open stairwell, Eira saw the crown core at last. It floated in a dark iron housing, glowing gold and blue, pulsing like a sleeping heart inside a machine body so massive that the tower walls seemed small around it. The core was beautiful in a cold way, but it was also fragile, because the voice warned that a forced command could shatter the bond between the fragments and leave the whole Guardian mindless. That was why the old rulers had hidden it. They had feared not only its power, but the damage a greedy hand could cause. Vance heard the warning and still reached for the light. Lady Raven saw that and moved at the same time, both of them now willing to betray the others in the open. Thorn swung his spear toward Vance, and Victor hurled a red rune burst to stop them all from crossing the threshold. The room erupted into chaos, but Eira finally understood her path. She was not there to claim the Guardian. She was there to keep everyone else from twisting it into a weapon. She took one slow breath, met Luke's eyes and saw trust there. She met Sarah's eyes and saw courage hiding under worry. Then she looked at the machine giant below and spoke clearly, telling it to hold. The sentinel arm answered, the forge legs braced, and the crown core dimmed to a steadier glow. For one brief moment, the tower stopped shaking. The Guardian was not fully awake yet, but it was listening. Eira had chosen responsibility over fear, and that choice changed her from a frightened ranger into something stronger. Still, the danger was not over, because the lower chamber had just opened wider, and from beyond the glowing core came the sound of another presence moving in the dark, as if something else had heard the awakening and had come to claim Greyhaven for itself. Greyhaven still crouched under a storm-dark sky, with broken bridges hanging over ash-filled streets and shattered towers casting long black shapes across the stone. Deep inside the ruined cathedral tower, the lower chamber glowed with a cold blue pulse, and that light made the dust in the air look like drifting snow. Eira stood near the opening with her torn dark ranger cloak hanging from her shoulders, her silver hair damp with sweat, her tired blue eyes fixed on the widening chamber below. She had already chosen responsibility over fear, and now that choice mattered more than ever, because the Guardian below was awake enough to listen, but not awake enough to protect anyone. Something else had moved in the dark, and if that hidden presence reached the crown core first, Greyhaven could become a weapon in the wrong hands. Around her, Luke kept low beside a cracked stone pillar, his brown hair messy under the dust, his green eyes locked on the shadows with careful loyalty. Sarah knelt near the wall with her red hair tied back, her healer satchel open, her soft brown eyes watching Eira with steady concern. They were not here for glory. Luke wanted to keep his friends alive, and Sarah wanted to keep the last hope of Greyhaven from breaking apart. They both knew the danger was real, because the ward blade had already stirred the living mech, and every heartbeat of that machine could draw enemies closer. Then a slow, heavy sound rolled up from the lower chamber, like iron feet dragging across stone, and Eira felt her spine tighten as the first real shape moved in the dark. The shape came into view in pieces, first a red glow, then a black outline, then a man stepping into the blue light as if he owned it. It was Vance, tall and calm, with black hair, sharp red eyes, pale skin, and polished red-black demon armor that shone like a blade under firelight. A heavy cape moved behind him, and his expression did not change when he saw Eira. He wanted control, and he wanted it for a reason that made cruel sense. Vance believed the sleeping Guardian should not belong to a ruined kingdom or to frightened survivors. He believed power existed for the strongest hand, and if he could command the living mech, then no city, border, or rebel camp would be able to resist him again. Beside him came Lady Raven, a woman with long black hair, pale skin, and striking gray eyes, wearing a smooth silver gown with dark armor accents and raven feather decorations. She smiled with cold superiority, and her voice was quiet when she spoke, which made her more dangerous. She did not want simple power the way Vance did. She wanted the kind of rule that lasted, the kind that made everyone look up to her and forget their own names. Behind them strode Victor, a man with white hair, sharp features, cold gray eyes, and a dark mage cloak covered in red rune patterns. He carried himself like a scholar who had already decided everyone else was a fool. Victor wanted knowledge above all else, and he believed the Guardian could reveal the old laws of Greyhaven, the true design of the Crown Core, and the reason the kingdom fell in the first place. Last came Thorn, a broad-shouldered man with short brown hair, a scarred face, and horned infernal knight armor marked with glowing red lines. He gripped a burning spear and moved with an aggressive stance, eager for a fight and angry that he had been sent into the ruins instead of a battlefield. These four had come together by need rather than trust, and that made them even worse, because each one wanted the same machine for a different selfish reason. Vance raised one hand toward the opening below and said that the Guardian would answer to him now, because the ward blade had already cracked the seal. Eira did not move. She had seen fear before, and she had learned that fear only won when people gave it a place to stand. Then the chamber shook again, harder this time, and the source of the sound changed from footsteps into a deep grinding rumble. The blue light from below grew brighter, and a giant shape began to rise at the edge of the lower chamber wall. It was the sentinel arm, a living mech fragment shaped like a cathedral iron arm with a built-in shield, blue energy lines, rusted edges, and heavy chain joints. Its massive form lifted slowly, as if the tower itself had begun to wake and stretch after a long sleep. The air filled with sparks and drifting dust, and the sound of old metal sliding awake made everyone tense. Victor narrowed his eyes, already studying the patterns in the energy lines. Sarah took one step back, her healer hands trembling only once before she steadied them. Luke reached for the crossbow on his back, not to attack but to protect the others if the chamber turned violent. Eira watched the sentinel arm and understood something important. The Guardian was not a mindless beast. It was reacting to command, and the command could come from the ward blade or from the right voice spoken at the right time. That meant Greyhaven was not simply a ruin. It was a lock, a weapon, and a test all at once. Lady Raven noticed Eira thinking, and her smile grew thinner. She told Eira that the tower only listened to strength, and that mercy had no place in the ruins of a fallen kingdom. But Eira remembered the feel of the chamber before, the way the Guardian had listened when she chose responsibility instead of panic. So she answered Lady Raven with a calm voice and said that strength without care was only another form of ruin. For a short moment the two women stared at each other through the blue glow, and the silence around them felt tighter than a drawn string. Then the ground under the chamber split open farther, and a second giant shape moved below, hidden by light and smoke. This time it was the forged legs, heavy armored legs with bronze joints, blue fire veins, and reinforced knee plates built for crushing force and defense. The tower was assembling itself piece by piece, and every new section made the danger larger. But the real shock came next, because the hidden presence that had been moving in the dark did not look like one of the mech pieces at all. It came from the far side of the chamber, slipping through a gap in the broken wall where the storm wind should have been empty. A pale shimmer crossed the stone, and then a figure stepped into the glow, cloaked and still, with movements too smooth to belong to any soldier there. Eira did not know the face at first, but the presence felt familiar in a way that made her chest tighten. The figure wore the marks of Greyhaven, not as a guard, but as a keeper. An old voice came from behind the stonework, weak but clear, and the tower answered with a low hum. The truth began to form inside Eira like a blade sliding into place. The Guardian had not awakened because of the ward blade alone. It had answered her earlier choice because she had done what the last keeper once failed to do. She had protected the seal instead of trying to own it. The hidden presence was not a stranger from another land. It was an old custodian of the tower, someone who had survived in secret, waiting for the Guardian to stir before stepping forward. He had watched the ruined capital for years because he feared the same thing everyone feared now. If the Crown Core woke fully in the wrong hands, Greyhaven would become a prison for every living person nearby. That was why he had hidden in the dark and guarded the chamber from below, even while Vance and his allies believed they had found a prize. Victor heard enough of this to understand the deeper truth, and for the first time his smug face lost its ease. The crown was not just power, it was a binding heart made to obey only those who protected the city first. The old keeper had made that rule after the kingdom fell, because greed had once nearly destroyed everything here. Eira felt the meaning hit her hard. She had not been chosen because she was the strongest. She had been chosen because she cared more than she feared. That was the twist hidden inside the tower, and it changed the whole fight. Vance wanted to command the machine, but command alone was not enough. He proved that by lifting the ward blade, the cursed command weapon wrapped in glowing Stormglass threads, and driving its power into the air with a sharp shout. The weapon screamed with blue lightning, and the sentinel arm shuddered as if caught between two commands. Thorn charged first, his burning spear leaving a red streak as he slammed forward to force the path open. Luke fired a bolt to divert him, not to wound, but to break the attack line and keep him from reaching Sarah. Sarah hurried to Eira and pressed a steadying hand against her arm, whispering that the tower would follow the truth if Eira could find her voice again. Victor began tracing red rune patterns in the air, trying to force the Crown Core into a binding spell before anyone else understood what he was doing. Lady Raven glided to the side, studying every reaction, ready to betray whoever failed first. The chamber turned into a storm of light, sound, and shadow, and yet the most important battle was not with weapons. It was with the will of the Guardian. Eira stepped forward, ignoring the shaking floor and the roar of energy, and spoke to the tower as if speaking to a person in pain. She told it that Greyhaven still needed a protector. She told it that the living did not want to use it for cruelty. She told it that she would not let greed turn the old kingdom into a prison again. Her voice cut through the noise, and the glowing core answered with a stronger pulse. The sentinel arm turned its shield toward Vance. The forged legs locked into place with a thunderous impact. The chamber itself seemed to straighten, as if the ruined cathedral had chosen its side. Vance's expression finally changed because he understood that he was losing the command. Lady Raven stepped back, her smile fading into irritation. Thorn was forced to retreat by the shield wall of blue light. Victor's rune circle collapsed before it could finish. For one bright instant, the crown core blazed with gold and blue fire, and the guardian stood fully awake enough to defend itself. Eira felt a wave of relief, but it lasted only a breath, because from deeper in the tower another hidden passage opened with a long stone groan, and from that darkness came a colder sound than any of the others, like someone smiling in the dark. The old keeper turned his head toward that passage and whispered that the second presence had finally revealed itself. Eira looked into the black opening and knew the real struggle had only just begun. The Tower of Greyhaven felt alive in the worst way, with cold stone walls, broken gears, and old dust pressing in from every side. Deep below the Shattered Kingdom, where ash still drifted through cracks in the floor, Eira stood in a narrow chamber beside the old keeper and the waking guardian, while Luke held his crossbow close and Sarah kept one hand near her satchel of herbs. Eira was a young woman with silver hair, pale skin, and tired blue eyes, and even now her torn dark ranger cloak looked small against the weight of the tower around her. The old keeper was a thin man with white hair and a weathered face, and he had spent years guarding secrets that could no longer stay hidden. Luke, a cautious man with brown hair and green eyes, wanted to protect the group and get everyone out alive. Sarah, a calm woman with red hair and brown eyes, wanted to keep fear from breaking their courage. They all knew the central danger now, and it was simple and terrible. If the tower fully awakened, the living mech hidden beneath it could be seized by the wrong hands and turned into a weapon that would crush what remained of Greyhaven. The first guardian had just lifted its head and shown signs of life, and for one brief second, hope had returned. Then the second hidden passage opened again, and that hope narrowed into a sharp point of dread. From the dark opening came a cold, pleased sound, and the old keeper whispered that the second presence had finally revealed itself. Eira did not move at first, because she understood that some enemies do not rush in when they can make fear do the work for them. The sound from the passage grew clearer, and then Lady Raven stepped into view with a slow, graceful pace that made the whole chamber seem smaller. She was a woman with long black hair, pale skin, and sharp gray eyes, wearing a smooth silver gown with dark armor accents and raven feather decorations, and she carried herself like she already owned the tower. Beside her came Vance, a man with black hair, pale skin, and sharp red eyes, wearing polished red-black demon armor with a high collar and a heavy cape, his calm face hiding a cruel mind. Behind them strode Thorn, a broad man with short brown hair, a scarred face, and horned infernal knight armor marked by glowing red lines, and his burning spear cast restless light across the stone. Eira felt Luke tense beside her, while Sarah drew back half a step, and the old keeper lowered his voice as if speaking too loudly might wake the tower itself. He said Lady Raven had not come to destroy Greyhaven for pride alone. She wanted the crown core, the radiant heart of the living mech, because whoever controlled it could command the great fragments hidden under the cathedral and force the broken kingdom into obedience. Victor, the white-haired mage with cold gray eyes and red rune patterns on his dark cloak, had given her the means to do it, because Victor believed the old kingdom should belong to whoever could control its power without hesitation. That answer made the enemy clear, and that was worse in many ways, because it meant every step they took was part of a plan that had been building for years. Lady Raven smiled at Eira with a look of cool pity, then said the tower no longer needed keepers or thieves, only someone smart enough to rule what was left. Her words were soft, but her motive was not. She wanted order through control, and she believed fear was the cleanest path to peace. The Guardian moved first. Its heavy body scraped against the floor, and blue energy lines lit up along its iron frame like veins of stormlight. The old keeper snapped that the tower would answer to command, not to panic, and he forced Eira to understand the rule that had been hidden from her until now. The ward blade, the cursed weapon with a black hilt wrapped in glowing Stormglass threads, did not simply awaken the living mech. It bound the pieces to the strongest will in the room. If fear or anger took over, the weapon could twist the bond and turn every fragment into a chained disaster. That was why the old keepers had hidden it, and that was why Victor had hunted it for so long. He did not just want power. He wanted a machine that could never refuse him. Eira reached for the blade anyway, because the choice was already made. She could feel the weight of its cursed pull like a cold hand around her thoughts, but she also felt something else now, something that steadied her. She was not trying to rule Greyhaven. She was trying to keep it from becoming a prison for everyone left alive inside it. Luke shouted a warning and fired his crossbow, forcing Thorn to raise his armored arm as the bolt struck and clattered away. Sarah pulled Luke back before Thorn could charge, and she shouted for Eira to stay focused. Eira took a breath, planted her feet, and raised the ward blade toward the Guardian. The first fragment answered with a deep mechanical groan, and the stone chamber shook as if the buried kingdom had heard its name called after a very long silence. Then the second presence spoke at last, and the reveal changed everything. It was not a monster waiting in the passage, and it was not another warrior in armor. It was a hidden control spirit bound into the tower long ago, a watchful intelligence left behind by the first builders of Greyhaven to guard the crown core when the kingdom still had hope. The keeper had called it a presence because no living person had seen it in years, but it had never left. It had been listening, learning, and waiting for someone worthy to ask the right question. It told them that Victor had found half of the old control notes and believed the mech could be forced into obedience, but that was only partly true. The living mech could be commanded only by someone who understood balance, not greed. The crown core did not respond well to force because force made the fragments fight each other until the tower collapsed inward. That was the hidden reason so many rulers had failed before, and it was why the old keeper had feared the ward blade for so long. Lady Raven frowned for the first time, and Vance narrowed his red eyes because their simple plan was breaking in front of them. Eira did not waste the moment. She asked the spirit where the crown core was sealed, and the answer came as a map of light across the walls, leading deeper below the tower, past a gate that only opened when the Guardian and the fragments moved together. The spirit also warned them that Victor was coming and that he had already sent something ahead of him. That warning mattered because the next danger was already on its way, and the tower was no longer just waking. It was choosing sides. The floor split with a sharp crack, and from the lower stairwell came Victor himself, calm as a winter blade, with his white hair shining under the red glow of his rune cloak. He was a man who spoke like every outcome had already been measured, and his cold gray eyes fixed on Eira with the patience of a man claiming a prize he believed was overdue. He said the old keepers had wasted Greyhaven by hiding its strength, and that the fallen kingdom needed a ruler with no fear of hard choices. He explained his motive at last, and the logic behind it was ugly but clear. Greyhaven had fallen because weak leaders hesitated, and in his mind hesitation was the same as betrayal. If he could unite the sentinel arm, the forged legs, and the crown core under one will, then no enemy, no rebel, and no rival kingdom could ever threaten him again. He did not want chaos. He wanted permanent control, and that made him more dangerous because he believed he was saving the world from itself. Lady Raven gave him a thin smile, but even she seemed annoyed that he was speaking as if she were not his equal partner in this. Thorn did not care for speeches, so he slammed the butt of his burning spear against the stone and moved toward Luke with open aggression. The chamber exploded into motion. Luke rolled aside, loaded another bolt, and fired again to keep Thorn from reaching Sarah. Sarah ducked behind a broken pillar where she could help with healing if anyone fell. Eira kept the ward blade raised, and the Guardian answered with a thunderous turn, shielding her from Vance as he tried to cut her off with swift red-black strikes. For a moment, the old tower became a storm of moving armor, flashing steel, and hard choices. Eira felt fear, but she did not let it decide for her anymore. She remembered the people behind her, the kingdom under her feet, and the truth that a good weapon meant nothing unless the person holding it chose mercy over power. The hidden spirit then made its final move, and the chamber opened wider as if the tower itself had accepted the challenge. Deep in the floor, a blue light rose in a steady pulse, and Eira understood that the crown core was near enough to answer, but not near enough to be claimed easily. The Guardian shifted toward the new path, and the Keeper shouted that the fragments were beginning to align. Eira looked at Luke, who nodded with loyal courage, then at Sarah, whose steady hands were already helping him recover from the shock of the clash. She even looked at Lady Raven, whose cold face had sharpened into real frustration, because for the first time her perfect control was slipping. That moment gave Eira a new truth to hold. The tower was not only a trap. It was a test, and the old builders had hidden a final rule inside it. Power would not answer to the one who forced the most fear, but to the one who kept others alive while making the hardest choice. Eira set the ward blade into the opening line of light, and the floor answered with a deep pulse that shook dust from the beams overhead. The great hidden path began to open, step by step, and the Guardian moved to guard her advance. Victor saw the change and lost a little of his calm because he understood that if Eira reached the crown core first, his long plan could collapse. He ordered Vance and Thorn forward, and Lady Raven turned her head as if deciding whether to support him or wait for a better chance. Eira did not know yet which one would betray the other first, but she knew the next descent would decide more than this chamber. It would decide whether Greyhaven would rise under a caring hand or fall under a cold one. With the tower groaning around her and the living mech answering her command, Eira stepped into the opening light, and the real struggle for the heart of Greyhaven moved one level deeper, with no mercy left to spare. The lower level of Greyhaven was colder than the chambers above, and the air felt heavy with old ash, wet stone, and sleeping power. Broken arches leaned over a wide shaft, and dim blue light pulsed through cracks in the floor like a weak heartbeat. Eira stood at the edge of the opening with her torn dark ranger cloak hanging from her shoulders, her silver hair catching the pale glow, and her tired blue eyes fixed on the path below. Behind her, Vance waited with his calm, cruel face and sharp red eyes, still wearing polished red-black demon armor and a heavy cape that made him look like a dark king. Lady Raven stood a little apart, long black hair falling over her silver gown, her gray eyes cool and sharp as steel. Thorn rested one hand on his burning spear, his broad shoulders tense inside horned infernal knight armor, while Victor watched in silence, his white hair and red rune cloak making him look like a patient trap. Luke kept close to Sarah, and both of them looked down into the shaft with fear and resolve, because they knew this descent could decide whether Greyhaven rose again or stayed broken forever. The ward stone door behind them sealed with a deep groan, and the sound made the choice feel final. Eira had already learned enough to know that no one here carried the same dream. Luke wanted to protect the people hidden in the ruins, and he wanted a leader who would not treat them like tools. Sarah wanted the wounded to be safe, and she wanted the city to become a place where healing mattered more than pride. The old keeper who had guided them this far with his grave face and secret words, now stood near the back with his weathered hands folded over old leather straps, as if he feared what the next chamber would reveal. He had spent years guarding the truth beneath Greyhaven, and he believed the sleeping heart of the city could save the realm only if the wrong hand never touched it. Eira had come this far because she wanted that same hope, but she had not yet decided if she could trust the people beside her. Vance wanted control because he believed mercy only made strong places weak. Lady Raven wanted influence because she believed a kingdom survived only when someone clever ruled it from above. Thorn wanted battle because he lived for force and command. Victor wanted the hidden power below for reasons he had not yet fully shown, and that made him the most dangerous one of all. The old keeper lifted a trembling finger and pointed toward the shaft. "The living guardian below will answer the ward blade," he said in a low voice, "but it does not serve kindness alone. It serves the one whose intent is strongest, and it punishes lies." That warning changed the air around them. Eira looked at the cursed command weapon in her hand, its black hilt wrapped in glowing Stormglass threads, and she remembered the strange pull she had felt when she first touched it. The weapon did not just awaken machines, it judged the heart of the one who held it. That was why the hidden core mattered so much. The crown core was not only a power source. It was the sleeping center of the living mech beneath the cathedral, and when it woke, it could either rebuild Greyhaven or turn its ancient strength into a weapon that would crush everything in its path. Vance had already made his motive clear. He wanted the mech under his command so he could force the broken kingdom into order, no matter how many people feared him. Lady Raven wanted to stand beside the winner and shape the future from the shadows. Victor wanted something deeper and colder because his smug smile hid a plan that no one else could yet fully see. He had not come to save Greyhaven, he had come to use its heart. Then Victor moved first. He raised one pale hand, and red runes burned along his cloak as dark magic spread across the chamber floor. The stone trembled, and from a broken wall above them, a storm of black shards dropped like rain. Thorn stepped forward at once, his burning spear blazing red-orange as he struck the air and shattered the first wave of debris. Luke pulled Sarah back behind a low stone pillar, and his crossbow came up in a smooth motion, ready to cover anyone who tried to rush them. Lady Raven did not flee, she only folded her hands and watched with a faint smile as if she had expected this split all along. Vance's eyes narrowed, and for one brief moment Eira thought he might attack Victor on the spot. Instead, he turned toward the shaft below and called out, "The choice is simple. One of us claims the Guardian now, or Victor buries us all before we reach it." Eira felt the lie inside his words because he still spoke as if the mech already belonged to him. Even so, Victor had made the chamber into a trap, and the next move would belong to whoever could survive the fall of trust. Eira lifted the ward blade, and the glowing Stormglass threads brightened until the weapon hummed like a storm held in a narrow cage. The sound answered from deep below, and the hidden machine began to wake. Heavy metal groaned. Chains dragged across stone. Blue light flared through the cracks in the floor, then shot upward in bright lines that carved the darkness with cold fire. From below came the first clear shape of the Guardian, a giant iron arm rising through the opening like the limb of a sleeping titan. The sentinel arm emerged with rusted edges, a built-in shield, and heavy chain joints that clanged against the stone frame. A moment later, the forged legs lifted into view beneath it, bronze joints flexing with crushing strength as blue fire veins lit the old armor from within. The chamber shook with each movement, and dust poured from the ceiling. Eira staggered, but she kept her grip on the ward blade because she could feel the Guardian listening for her choice. Vance saw the mech rise and stepped back with sharp hunger in his eyes. Thorn smiled like a man who wanted to test the giant with force. Victor, however, lost some of his calm, and that small crack in his face told Eira something important. He had not expected the Guardian to awaken so quickly, and he had not expected Eira to hold the command. The old keeper shouted over the noise, "The Guardian will not follow any thief of the heart." His words landed hard, and for the first time, Eira understood the deeper truth. The mech had been built long ago to protect Greyhaven from greedy rulers, and the command weapon had been forged with a curse to reject false intent. The old keeper had not only hidden the crown core to keep it safe. He had hidden it because the city had once nearly been ruined by a ruler who tried to force the Guardian into war. That past betrayal had shaped everything in the tower. Eira saw it now. The ruined kingdom had not fallen only from outside attack. It had been weakened by leaders who wanted power more than people. That same danger stood before her again, wearing polished armor, silver silk, burning steel, and smug magic. Lady Raven's eyes flicked toward Victor, then toward Eira, and her cold smile tightened, because she understood the same truth and did not like where it was leading. Luke shouted for Eira to move left as another wave of dark shards burst from Victor's magic, and Sarah used the moment to run to a fallen guard and press healing cloth against a wounded arm from the earlier chaos above. Even in the middle of the clash, she still chose care first, and that choice gave Eira strength. Eira stepped forward instead of back, and the ward blade answered her will with a sharp ring. The sentinel arm slammed its shield down between her and Victor, blocking a surge of red magic. Thorn charged in beside it, his spear carving through the smoke and driving Victor to retreat a few steps. Luke climbed onto a broken slab and fired 2 bolts in quick order, forcing Victor to shield himself and giving Eira a clear path toward the center of the chamber. Lady Raven glided through the confusion with calm grace, her silver gown flashing in the blue light as she reached for the laddered edge of the shaft, not to help anyone, but to place herself where the winner would see her first. That was her true gift and her true flaw. She waited for advantage, not for justice. Eira hated that answer, yet she understood it. Greyhaven had brought together people who all wanted the future, but none of them wanted it for the same reason. Then the floor below cracked open with a deep thunder, and the crown core pulsed awake in full sight for the first time. It was a radiant Stormglass heart in dark iron housing, glowing gold and blue like a living star, and it hung beneath the Guardian as if the whole ruin was built around its pulse. Eira felt the pull of it in her bones. At the same time, she felt Victor looking at it with naked hunger, as if he had finally reached the prize he had planned for all along. The twist came in that instant, and it was simple and terrible. Victor had never needed the Guardian to obey him. He had come to force the core open, because he believed the crown core could be broken and remade into a source of endless command, one that would let him rule not just Greyhaven, but every place that feared its power. The revelation hit harder than the magic. Eira saw why the old keeper had been so afraid and why he had watched everyone so closely. The real danger was not only who would sit above Greyhaven. It was who would turn its sleeping heart into a chain. Eira turned her gaze from Victor to Vance, and for a moment she saw the same cold ambition there, only wrapped in cleaner words. Vance wanted control through order. Victor wanted control through force. Lady Raven wanted to stand beside both and wear the winner like a crown. Thorn wanted the strongest hand to rule, even if that hand hurt everyone else. Luke and Sarah wanted a safer city, and the old keeper wanted to atone for the old mistake that had helped bury it. Eira stood between all of them, breathing hard, with ash in her hair and the ward blade burning in her hand, and she finally understood what her choice had to be. She did not need the easiest path, she needed the right one. She lifted her chin, fixed her tired blue eyes on the pulsing core below, and stepped toward the edge of the platform as the Guardian rose higher around her. The giant machine was waking fully now, and its blue lines flashed across the chamber walls like warning fire. Victor raised both hands to strike again. Vance moved at the same time, and his expression turned sharp with impatience because he saw that Eira was no longer uncertain. Then the old tower groaned above them, a deep sound like the kingdom itself waking from a bad dream, and the entire chamber tilted toward the next unseen chamber below. Eira kept her balance by sheer will, and as the light from the crown core flooded the broken stone, she knew the struggle for Greyhaven had entered a new and more dangerous stage, with allies still untrusted, enemies still moving, and the true descent only just beginning. The ruined heart of Greyhaven felt colder now, as if the stones themselves had learned fear. Ash drifted through the broken cathedral shaft, and the blue light from the crown core fell across cracked walls, bent iron, and old carvings that had been worn smooth by time. Eira stood at the edge of the tilted chamber, her silver hair loose around her face, her torn dark ranger cloak hanging from one shoulder, and her tired blue eyes fixed on the dark opening below. She knew the truth now, and it was simple and terrible. If the living mech beneath Greyhaven woke in the wrong hands, the kingdom would not be saved. It would be turned into a weapon. That was why Victor wanted it. That was why Lady Raven watched every move. That was why Vance smiled like a man who already expected victory. And that was why the old keeper had led them this far, because he wanted someone brave enough to finish what he had guarded for too long. Luke moved to Eira's side, careful and steady, his brown hair damp with dust and sweat. He was a cautious man, but his green eyes were sharp, and his loyalty had already pulled him through too many bad moments to count. He kept one hand near the crossbow on his back while he looked into the lower shaft and muttered that the next step looked like a drop into a grave. Sarah came close after him, her red hair tied back, her healer robe marked with ash, and her gray shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. She was gentle, but she was not weak, and her kind hands had already stopped more pain than any sword in the group could cause. Behind them, the old keeper stood with his weathered face low in the blue glow, his white hair thin and wild, his faded robe hanging from his narrow frame. He had a grave look, and he finally said that the shaft led toward the machine chamber where the crown core and the ward blade could wake the guardian below. He also said the mech was not a simple tool, it was a judge. It would serve only when the right hand gave the right command, and if the wrong heart touched the ward blade, the whole power of Greyhaven could turn against its own people. That warning landed hard because the group still did not trust one another fully. Eira did not trust the old keeper because he had hidden too much for too long. Luke did not trust Victor because Victor had already lied once with a calm face. Sarah did not trust Lady Raven because her soft voice always carried a cold edge. And Victor did not trust anyone at all because he believed that trust was just a weakness people used before they took what they wanted. His white hair shone under the blue light, his dark mage cloak was covered with red rune patterns, and his sharp gray eyes studied the crown core like a merchant studying gold. He stepped forward and said that the kingdom needed a ruler, not a memory. He claimed the living mech could restore order if guided by discipline. He claimed Greyhaven had fallen because too many weak hands tried to protect it. But his true motive was plain to Eira now. Victor did not want to save Greyhaven. He wanted to own it, and he wanted the ward blade because it would let him command the guardian without asking anyone else. Before Eira could answer, the chamber gave another long groan and dust poured from the broken arch above them. The tilted floor shifted again, and the open mouth of the lower shaft widened like a waiting trap. Then a new sound rolled up from the dark below, heavy and slow, like a giant metal body turning in its sleep. Sarah swallowed hard. Luke lifted his crossbow at once. The old keeper shut his eyes for a brief second, as if he had feared this moment for years. The blue lines in the stone beneath the crown core pulsed once, then twice, and the hidden stairs on the far side of the chamber began to reveal themselves under a layer of dust. Eira took one step forward, then stopped when a sharp laugh drifted from the shadows above the broken ledge. Lady Raven had appeared on a higher stone bridge, her long black hair flowing over her smooth silver gown, the dark armor accents catching the blue light, and the raven feather decorations along her shoulders making her look like a queen built from midnight. Her gray eyes were cold and bright, and her superior smile never changed as she looked down at the group. Lady Raven spoke with perfect calm, saying that Eira was brave, but bravery was only useful when someone smarter knew where to aim it. She explained her own motive without bothering to hide it. She wanted the crown core because the hidden machine could secure the future for whoever controlled the capital. She believed Greyhaven should belong to the strongest mind, not the weakest crowd. To her, mercy was wasted effort, and the old kingdom had failed because it trusted honor more than power. Victor gave her a brief look of annoyance because he did not like rivals, even clever ones, but he could not ignore her because she had already brought enough soldiers and influence to make her dangerous. Then Vance stepped out beside her, his black hair neat, his sharp red eyes fixed on Eira with a calm and cruel expression. His red-black demon armor caught the light in hard lines, and his heavy cape moved behind him like a dark banner. He said nothing for a moment, and that silence made him worse than the others. When he finally spoke, he said he had no interest in Greyhaven itself. He only wanted the one who survived to owe him a favor. He enjoyed pressure, fear, and the moment when people realized they were already trapped. The tension snapped tighter when Thorn climbed up from the broken side passage, his short brown hair matted with ash, his scarred face twisted in anger, and his broad shoulders filling the narrow opening. His horned infernal knight armor glowed with thin red lines, and the burning spear in his hand lit the broken stone with harsh orange fire. He was not subtle, and he did not pretend to be. He wanted the machine for force, plain and simple. He believed power should be taken, held, and used to crush every enemy before they could rise again. His aggressive stance said he would rather break the world than share it. When Thorn saw the crown core, his eyes sharpened, and he moved like a weapon coming alive. That was the moment Eira understood how fast this could collapse. Victor wanted control, Raven wanted command, Vance wanted leverage. Thorn wanted destruction and strength, and all of them would fight each other if the prize was close enough. Greyhaven was not facing one enemy, it was standing between 4 different kinds of greed. Eira raised her chin and stepped between the others and the opening below. She was tired, and she knew it, but her body still carried the hard training of a ranger who had learned to move through broken places without hesitation. Her voice stayed clear as she told them that none of them would get the crown core while she still stood. She said Greyhaven was not a throne to steal, it was a burden to carry. For the first time, Luke saw more than a scared young woman in front of him. He saw someone who had chosen to stop running. Sarah looked at Eira with quiet relief because she had wanted that courage to return. Even the old keeper lowered his head as if a long sealed door had finally been opened inside him. But Victor only smiled, and that smile was the worst one yet. He said Eira had already answered him. She was ready to become useful. Then he lifted one hand and red runes lit along the walls, waking hidden seals in the chamber. The stones around the crown core flashed. The floor trembled, and somewhere below, the guardian stirred harder as if Victor had touched a sleeping nerve in the whole kingdom. The next seconds came fast. Luke fired his crossbow toward the ledge where Victor had stood, but Victor had already slipped back behind a stone support, and the bolt struck sparks from the wall instead. Sarah pulled Eira back from a falling slab, then reached for the old keeper when dust began pouring over his feet. The chamber tilted again, and this time the movement was strong enough to drag broken rubble toward the shaft. A narrow staircase appeared farther down, built from black stone and blue-lit iron ribs, and the route was clear only for a moment. The old keeper shouted that they had to move now because the ward seals were failing and the machine chamber would soon lock. He pointed toward the stairs and said the lower shaft would lead to the next ring of the guardian body, where the sentinel arm and the forge legs had been stored in separate chambers for centuries. He warned that the weapon pieces were alive in their own way, and once the ward stone door closed, only the ward blade could open the path again. That was when the real shock came. The old keeper reached into his robe and pulled out a broken metal key wrapped in cloth, but Eira saw the shape at once. It was a match to the ward blade housing, or at least part of one. She stared at him, and he finally admitted the truth. Years ago, he had not only guarded the crown core, he had hidden the pieces of the command path from everyone, including the old royal council, because he believed they would use the mech to keep power forever. He had been waiting for someone who would refuse that cycle, someone who could take the burden without becoming another tyrant. He looked at Eira when he said it, and the meaning was impossible to miss. He had not brought them here by chance. He had been testing her all along. Eira felt anger rise in her chest because she hated being used, but she also understood why he had done it. Greyhaven had been broken by greedy rulers before. He had feared making the same mistake again. Before anyone could answer him, a deep metal sound rolled up from the dark shaft below, and a huge blue eye of light opened in the far chamber beneath them. The guardian was awake now, or nearly awake, and its massive shape could be seen only in pieces through the smoke and iron beams. One heavy arm shifted, a shield-like plate ground against the stone. The whole lower level trembled as if a sleeping giant had just turned over. Eira felt the crown core pulse in her hands, warm and dangerous, and she knew the next descent would decide far more than one battle. It would decide who Greyhaven belonged to, who would be trusted, and who would be forced back into the dark. Luke stepped beside her without hesitation. Sarah stayed close behind, ready to heal any wound she could reach. The old keeper lifted his head again, and for the first time he looked less like a secret keeper and more like a frightened man who had finally chosen a side. Above them, Victor laughed softly from the broken ledge. Lady Raven watched with patient delight. Vance remained still as a blade, and Thorn raised his burning spear toward the shaking floor. Eira looked down into the glowing stairwell, tightened her grip, and led the others toward the next chamber, knowing the true heart of Greyhaven was waiting below, and knowing the story was far from over. The lower shaft of Greyhaven felt like the inside of a buried tomb, cold, broken, and full of old breath. Blue light leaked from cracks in the stone floor, and ash drifted through the air like gray snow. Eira moved first because that was what she always did when fear tried to slow everyone else. She was a young woman with silver hair, pale skin, and tired blue eyes, and even with a torn dark ranger cloak hanging from her shoulders, she carried herself like someone who refused to fall. Behind her came Luke, a cautious man with brown hair, tanned skin, and alert green eyes, always looking back at every shadow. Sarah followed close with her red hair tied back, her healer robe stained from the climb, her face calm even when her hands shook. The old keeper came last. He was an older man with white hair, a weathered face, and a thin frame, and for the first time he no longer looked like a secret keeper. He looked like a frightened man who had finally chosen a side. Above them, the broken ledge still held their enemies. Victor, a white-haired mage in a dark cloak with red rune patterns, watched with a smug smile because he wanted the crown core for himself. Lady Raven, a woman with long black hair, pale skin, and gray eyes, smiled with cold patience because she liked people who broke under pressure. Vance, a man with black hair, sharp red eyes, and polished red and black demon armor, stood still and calm because he wanted control without having to raise his voice. Thorn, broad-shouldered, scarred, and wearing horned infernal knight armor with glowing red lines, raised his burning spear because he wanted force to answer every problem. The central conflict was simple now. If Victor reached the crown core first, he could command the living mech under Greyhaven and turn the fallen kingdom into his weapon. If Lady Raven and Thorn helped him, then the whole city would become a trap for anyone who resisted. And if Vance was lying, which Eira strongly believed, then the deepest danger was not the enemies above, but the hidden plan moving beside them in silence. The old keeper looked at the glowing stairwell and whispered that the lower heart of Greyhaven was still awake, still listening, and still bound by a cursed command weapon called the Ward Blade. He said the weapon could wake the Guardian, the giant mechanical protector buried below the cathedral, but it could also bend it toward ruin if the wrong hand held it. Eira did not answer right away. She only tightened her grip and led the others farther down, because stopping now would let fear win. The next chamber opened without warning, and the group stepped into a round vault supported by cracked stone arches. In the center sat a massive sealed stone frame, and inside that frame hung a black door lined with stormglass threads that gave off a faint blue spark. The old keeper stopped at once. He told them this was the ward stone door, the only true barrier between the shaft and the machine heart below. Long ago, Greyhaven had been built around the living mech, not on top of it. The people of the Old Kingdom had feared wars, so they had built a guardian beneath the cathedral to protect the city when ordinary soldiers could not. That guardian was not dead, it was only sleeping. Its sentinel arm, a giant iron limb with a built-in shield and chained joints, rested in one chamber below. Its forged legs, heavy armored legs with bronze joints and blue fire veins, waited in another. And at the center of it all rested the crown core, a glowing stormglass heart inside dark iron housing, pulsing like a sleeping chest. The old keeper said the ward blade could command the fragments and wake the whole body, but the old rulers had hidden the blade because they feared greed more than enemies. He admitted then, with a long and painful breath, that he had not only protected the secret. He had helped hide the blade from the wrong hands, and years ago he had hidden it from Victor before Victor ever became this bold. That was the first real twist of the night, because it meant Victor did not simply discover Greyhaven. He had been searching for it for years. Sarah stared at the old keeper with shock, Luke frowned in anger, and Eira felt the pieces click together. Victor did not want knowledge, he wanted the machine because he believed power should belong to the cleverest person in the room. Lady Raven wanted the same power, but she wanted the pleasure of choosing who else would kneel. Thorn wanted the mech because he thought a force like that would prove his strength, and Vance, who said almost nothing, seemed to want the way their greed would expose them all. Before Eira could ask more, a low tremor rolled through the floor and dust fell from the arch above. The sealed door had begun to wake. The sound came first as a metal groan, deep and slow, like a giant taking its first breath after centuries of sleep. Blue lines flashed through the black threads on the ward stone door, then crawled across the floor and up the walls. Luke raised his crossbow, a rough and practical man who trusted tools more than promises, and Sarah moved beside him with her satchel open, ready to help whoever stumbled first. Eira stepped toward the door and the old keeper quickly stopped her. He said the door would not open for force. It would only open for command. That meant someone had to bind the ward blade to the lower heart and speak the old authority seal. Victor laughed from above and shouted that the lower chamber was already his, but his voice sounded thinner now, because the echo of the shaft no longer made him feel in control. Lady Raven leaned over the ledge and watched Eira with a cold smile, clearly enjoying the sight of a young woman carrying a burden too large for her shoulders. Then Thorn slammed the end of his burning spear against the broken floor, and the shock sent another crack through the stone. The chamber answered with a flare of blue light, and for one terrible moment everyone heard a giant metal arm shift somewhere below. Eira understood at once that the Guardian was not the only thing waking. The lower shaft itself was coming apart, and if the door opened the wrong way, the whole descent could collapse. The old keeper finally reached into his robe and pulled out the ward blade. It was a black hilt wrapped in glowing Stormglass threads, cold and heavy, and it seemed to hum the moment it saw the sealed frame. Victor went still above them because he knew the blade had been hidden on purpose. That was another revelation, clear and sharp. The old keeper had not betrayed Eira. He had been waiting for the right person to carry the weapon, and he now believed that person was her. Eira took the blade, and the instant her fingers closed around it, the humming changed into a steady pulse. She felt no joy in it, only pressure, as if the whole buried kingdom had just placed a hand on her chest. The command seal began to work, but it did not open the door at once. Instead, the chamber filled with moving light. Blue lines ran in circles across the stone, and then the wall itself shifted, grinding aside to reveal a narrow path deeper below. Beyond it, the air was hotter, metal-scented, and far older than the ruins above. Eira led the way through the opening while Luke stayed close on her left and Sarah kept her hand ready at his back. The old keeper followed with a bowed head as if each step was a confession. Behind them came a harsh sound from the ledge above because Victor had finally lost patience. He ordered Thorn to force the way down, and he ordered Lady Raven to find a better path. Lady Raven did not argue, she only turned her gray eyes toward Vance and asked if he would keep his promise. Vance answered with a calm smile that made no promise at all. Then he moved. He did not attack. He did not shout. He simply stepped to the side and cut the rope anchor that held part of the broken ledge, causing a slab of stone to crash down between Victor and the stairway. It was a quiet betrayal, and the meaning of it was brutal. Vance was not loyal to Victor, Lady Raven, or even Thorn. He was helping whichever side would be most useful when the true heart of Greyhaven was found. Victor barked in fury and called Vance a traitor, but Vance only watched him with red eyes and said that power always belonged to the one who understood timing. That moment pushed the stakes even higher, because now the enemy group was breaking apart while the lower shaft was opening into the machine chambers. Eira felt the ward blade grow warm in her hand, and the old keeper whispered that the command had begun. The Guardian was listening now. If the crown core was touched without the right sequence, the whole mech could turn against everyone in the city. Eira did not want to become a ruler of ruins. She only wanted to stop Victor from turning Greyhaven into a cage, but she also began to understand something harder. The mech had been built to protect people who could not protect themselves. If the core still held that purpose, then waking it might be the only way to save the kingdom from the greed above. They reached the inner stair and looked down into a massive chamber where the ceiling disappeared into shadow. Far below, between broken pillars and hanging chains, the sentinel arm rested beside a shattered platform, its iron shield cracked but still bright with blue lines. Beyond it, the forge legs stood locked into the floor like sleeping towers, and at the center of the chamber, half hidden behind smoke and dust, pulsed the crown core. It glowed gold and blue inside dark iron housing, and the light beat like a slow and powerful heart. Eira froze because the sight was beautiful and terrible at once. The old keeper explained the final truth in a voice that trembled but did not hide. The old rulers had not only hidden the ward blade to guard the mech, they had also separated the mech parts so no single ruler could wake the whole guardian alone. Victor had learned fragments of the truth from stolen records, and that was why he had hunted the city. He believed the Crown Corps would obey anyone who held enough force and enough knowledge. He was wrong, because the Corps did not answer greed. It answered intent. The ward blade was not just a weapon, it was a test. Whoever woke the Guardian had to accept the burden of what it would protect. Before Eira could move, Victor and Lady Raven appeared on the upper walkway, and Thorn crashed through another side passage in a burst of sparks. The final confrontation was about to begin, but not in the simple way anyone expected. Victor called down that Eira could not stop him because the living mech belonged to the strongest mind. Lady Raven added that she would enjoy watching Eira fail. Thorn raised his burning spear and promised to shatter anything that stood in his way, yet the chamber itself was changing. The Guardian stirred below, massive iron plates shifting, blue energy lines brightening one by one, and the entire lower shaft shook as if the buried city had finally opened its eyes. Eira lifted the ward blade and felt its pulse answer hers. She did not know yet whether the mech would obey her, reject her, or destroy the chamber around them. She only knew that the next choice would change Greyhaven forever, and that the story was still moving deeper into darkness. The lower shaft shook harder, and dust fell in thin sheets from the cracked stone above. Blue light ran through the Guardian like waking veins, and every metal plate shifted with a deep, heavy groan. Eira stood close to the machine with the ward blade in both hands, her silver hair sticking to her face, her tired blue eyes fixed on the giant shape below. She was a young woman with a lean build, a torn dark ranger cloak, black travel clothes, leather boots, and fingerless gloves, and in that moment she looked less like a lost wanderer, and more like someone forced to grow into a leader in one breath. She wanted to survive, but more than that, she wanted to stop Greyhaven from becoming a grave for everyone still inside it. The danger was clear now. If the Guardian woke wrong, the whole shaft could collapse. If her enemies reached the Crown Corps first, they would turn the living machine into a tool of fear. Behind her, Luke, a cautious man with brown hair, tan skin, and alert green eyes, kept one hand on his crossbow and the other on the wall for balance. Sarah, a kind woman with red hair, fair skin, and soft brown eyes, held her healer satchel close and watched Eira with steady worry. They both knew the same truth. This was no longer only about escape. This was about who would claim the buried power of Greyhaven. A deep clang echoed from below, and the Guardian lifted one massive arm fragment as if testing the air. Eira felt the ward blade pulse in reply, warm for one moment and cold the next, as if some hidden voice inside it was asking her to speak the right command. Then the stone platform under her boots split with a sharp crack, and a seam of blue fire opened down the center of the shaft. The chamber brightened in broken flashes, revealing more of the machine above the dark. A giant tower-shaped protector with rusted edges, heavy chain joints, and blue energy lines running under its iron plates. It was not dead, it was waiting. That truth changed the fear in the room, because a waiting Guardian could still become a protector, but it could also become a weapon if the wrong hand reached for it. Eira took one careful step forward, and the ward blade guided her wrist toward a narrow control ring set into the Guardian arm. As soon as the blade tip touched it, the entire mech shuddered, and a low voice, old and mechanical, rolled through the shaft like thunder under stone. Sarah gasped. Luke swore under his breath. Eira held her ground because she understood now that the machine was not simply listening to commands, it was judging her. The first enemy to answer the sound was Victor. He appeared on a broken bridge high above the shaft, a man with white hair, sharp features, and cold gray eyes, wearing a dark mage cloak covered in red rune patterns. His smug face carried the calm of someone who believed every living thing could be measured and used. Victor wanted the Crown Corps because it held ancient Stormglass power, and he believed that power should belong to the strongest mind, which in his view meant his own. He raised one hand, and red rune light gathered around his fingers like a net. At his side came Lady Raven, a woman with long black hair, pale skin, and striking gray eyes, wearing a smooth silver gown with dark armor accents and raven feather decorations. She wore a cold, superior smile, and she wanted the same machine for a different reason. She did not care about the Corps itself. She cared about the right to stand over every house in Greyhaven and call it her own. Her pride was sharp and clean, and it made her dangerous in a quieter way than Victor. The moment she saw Eira holding the ward blade, her smile deepened, because she believed the girl had already made a mistake by touching power she did not understand. Before either enemy could strike, the Guardian moved again. One giant iron hand slammed down between the broken bridge and the lower shaft, sending a shock through the chamber and forcing Victor to step back. The heavy impact did not crush anyone, but it made the message clear. The mech would not serve freely. It reacted to command, yes, but it was still a living fortress with its own instinct. That meant Eira had to do more than point the blade. She had to earn the machine. On the far side of the shaft, a harsh shout cut through the noise and Thorn charged into view. He was a broad man with short brown hair, a scarred face, and horned infernal knight armor lined with glowing red streaks. He carried a burning spear and moved with the rough force of someone who loved direct conflict more than thought. Thorn wanted battle, and he wanted the Guardian because its power would give him a war nobody could stop. He believed Greyhaven was already broken, so taking it by force felt to him like a natural right. With him came Vance, a man with black hair, sharp red eyes, pale skin, and polished red-black demon armor with a high collar and a heavy cape. Vance looked calm, almost bored, but cruelty lived behind his still face. He wanted the Guardian not for pride or chaos, but for control. He knew that if he held the living machine, then fear would follow him everywhere and people would obey before they dared to resist. For one breath, all four powers pressed toward the same center. Victor stretched red rune threads toward the lower shaft. Lady Raven moved with measured grace along the broken bridge, her silver gown catching the blue light as if she belonged to the ruin more than the ruin belonged to itself. Thorn drove forward like a hammer, spear burning, ready to strike anything that blocked him. Vance stayed just behind them, patient and cold, because he preferred to win after others had exhausted themselves. Luke saw the danger first and fired his crossbow not to kill but to force Thorn to turn aside. The bolt struck armor and sparked off. Sarah hurried to Eira and pressed a small wrapped charm into her palm, saying the old healer words that helped steady shaking hands. She was not a fighter, but she had a brave heart, and her role mattered because Eira could not face the chamber alone. Eira looked down at the charm, then at the ward blade, and then at the Guardian. She began to understand the shape of the trap. The blade was not just a command tool. It was also a test. The old king who made it had feared that any ruler would use the Guardian without restraint, so he buried the machine deep and made its control answer only to a person who could act without greed. That was why the chamber had waited so long. It had been built to reject hunger and reward purpose. The old keeper emerged from a narrow side stair as if he had always been there, hidden in the dark where secrets lived best. He was an older man with white hair, a weathered face, and a thin frame, wearing a faded dark robe layered with old leather straps. His grave expression showed that he had carried this burden for many years. He had hidden the ward blade because the blade could wake the Guardian, and he had hidden the truth because he knew powerful people would tear Greyhaven apart to own it. Now, with the chamber shaking around them, he spoke the truth at last. The crown core was not a treasure. It was the heart of the Guardian itself, the source that kept the ancient machine alive beneath the cathedral. Without the core, the Guardian would eventually fail. With the core in the wrong hands, the city above could become a fortress of conquest. The old man had waited for someone who could choose protection over power. Eira listened, and the story inside her mind changed. She had thought she was only trying to survive one more night. Now she saw that the whole ruin had been built around a single choice, and that choice had finally reached her hands. Then the twist came, clear and sharp. The ward blade did not answer force. It answered memory. When Eira pressed her hand to the glowing control ring, the blade flashed and her own forgotten dreams stirred in her mind. She saw a child version of herself standing in a clean hall long before Greyhaven fell, watching the old king place the blade into a stone cradle while the old keeper stood nearby. The king had not hidden the Guardian because he feared enemies from outside. He had hidden it because he feared the greed of his own court. And the child in the memory, silver-haired and small, had been brought there because her family line had once sworn to guard the machine. Eira froze. The ward blade was not simply reacting to her courage. It recognized her blood and her oath. That was why the weapon had stayed near her since the beginning, why it had pulsed when others touched it, and why the machine now watched her as if waiting for an answer passed down through generations. The revelation made the chamber feel both larger and smaller at once. Eira was not an accident in this ruin. She was part of its final lock. Victor saw the change in her face and smiled with sudden interest. Lady Raven narrowed her eyes because she realized the same thing at the same time. Thorn did not care about the meaning, only the battle, so he launched his burning spear at the guardian arm to break the control ring. Vance moved at once, his cape sweeping behind him as he sent a wave of dark force toward the lower shaft, trying to shock Eira away from the center. The chamber erupted into motion. Luke pulled Sarah behind a broken stone buttress while he reloaded. The guardian lifted its second arm, and the blue energy lines along its body brightened into a hard, steady glow. Eira heard the ancient voice again, lower this time, almost like a question, not command, not surrender, choice. Her fingers tightened around the ward blade, and for the first time she did not think about what the blade wanted from her. She thought about what Greyhaven needed. She thought about Luke, who had never left her side when fear would have been easier. She thought about Sarah, who kept healing others even when no one thanked her. She thought about the ruined streets above, the people still trapped in the shadow of this war, and the way every greedy hand had already taken too much. Eira lifted her chin, and her tired blue eyes hardened into something stronger than fear. She spoke one clear command, not with pride, but with purpose. The ward blade flared, and the guardian answered. Its giant iron arm swept outward and slammed Thorn back from the control ring, forcing the infernal knight to retreat across the broken bridge. The shield built into the sentinel arm rose with a heavy clang, catching Victor and breaking the line of his rune spell. Lady Raven stepped aside with perfect balance, but her polished calm cracked for a moment when the mech turned its blue gaze toward her. Vance tried to hold his ground, yet even he could feel the force rising in the machine, and his expression tightened for the first time. The lower shaft shuddered again, stronger now, and deep below, a second shape began to rise. Forge legs. The massive armored lower half of the Guardian shifted upward through the dark, bronze joints flashing, blue fire veins burning, and reinforced knee plates locking into place with a sound like iron doors closing. Eira stared at it in shock because she had only awakened part of the giant, and the rest was still climbing toward her from beneath the city. The old man pulled her back and shouted that the core chamber was opening, which meant the next passage was near. That was when everyone understood the true problem. The Guardian was waking fully, and whoever reached the crown core first would decide whether Greyhaven rose again as a shield, a throne, or a weapon. Eira had won one breath of control, but the war for the buried heart was only beginning. Greyhaven shuddered like a giant in pain, and dust drifted down from the broken arches above the lower shaft. Blue light leaked through cracks in the stone, and the narrow passage ahead glowed and faded like a tired heartbeat. Eira stood in front of the others, silver hair falling over her face, her torn dark cloak hanging from one shoulder, while her tired blue eyes stayed fixed on the opening seam of the core chamber. She had forced one part of the buried Guardian to move, and that single act had changed everything, because now the machine was waking, the city was shaking, and whoever reached the crown core first would decide the fate of Greyhaven. The old keeper, a thin old man with white hair and a weathered face, pressed one hand to the wall and listened with a grave look, because he knew the next passage was near, and he knew the city would not stay still much longer. Behind Eira, Luke checked his crossbow with careful hands. Sarah held her leather satchel close, and both of them understood the same hard truth. If the wrong person took the core, Greyhaven would become a throne for greed or a weapon for ruin. The first to move was Victor, the white-haired mage in the dark cloak covered with red rune patterns. He stepped from the side tunnel with a calm smile, as if this entire disaster was only one more calculation in his mind. His sharp gray eyes looked past Eira and onto the glowing seam ahead, because Victor did not want to save Greyhaven, and he did not want to destroy it either. He wanted to command it, study it, and use its hidden power to lift himself above every lord, knight, and kingdom left in the broken world. Beside him came Lady Raven, a woman with long black hair, pale skin, and cool gray eyes, wearing a smooth silver gown with dark armor accents and raven feather decorations. She carried herself like a queen who had already won, and her cold smile made it clear that she believed weakness was something other people suffered. She did not want the Guardian for simple conquest, because she wanted a new order where only the clever and the strong would rule the ruins. Thorn followed close behind her, broad-shouldered and hard-faced, his short brown hair damp with ash, his horned infernal armor glowing in red lines, his burning spear raised like a threat. Thorn wanted direct power, and he wanted the right to crush anyone who stood in his way. Then came Vance, the man with black hair, sharp red eyes, and polished red-black demon armor, moving with quiet control and a cruel calm. He had not spoken much before, but his silence now was heavy, because Vance wanted the Crown Corps to turn Greyhaven into a perfect tool of fear, something that would bend cities to obedience without mercy. Their reasons were different, but their goal was the same, and that made them more dangerous because every one of them believed the city belonged to the strongest hand. Eira lifted her chin and held her ground, even as the floor trembled under her boots. The old keeper stepped forward beside her and finally told the truth in a voice that sounded old enough to crumble. Long ago, Greyhaven had been built around the Guardian not as a prison, but as a promise. The giant machine had been made to protect the capital if the outside world broke open, but the Crown Corps had a second purpose that the builders had hidden from most people. If the core was awakened with the ward blade in the wrong hand, the Guardian would obey a single command and keep obeying until it burned through every limit it had. That was why the ward blade mattered so much, and that was why the old man had been so afraid. The cursed command weapon, with its black hilt wrapped in glowing Stormglass threads, was not just a key. It was a law. It could wake the living mech and chain its will to whoever held it, which meant the wrong person could turn Greyhaven into a walking fortress, a siege engine, or a prison for the whole region. Sarah looked stricken when she heard it, because she understood what a weapon like that would do in the hands of a cold mind. Luke swore under his breath and shifted toward the front, ready to shield the others if the enemy rushed them. Eira then realized the deeper truth at the center of the old man's warning, and it landed like a stone in her chest. The battle was not only for the Crown Corps, but for the rules of the Guardian itself. A deep grinding sound rolled through the lower shaft, and then the stone ahead began to open. Ancient lines lit up on the ward's stone door, and the heavy locking frame pulled back with a groan that echoed through the whole buried city. For one breath, everyone froze, because the opening door meant the next passage had finally been found, and the Crown Corps chamber was no longer a rumor. Then Victor raised one hand, and red runes flashed under his sleeve, striking sparks across the air. The tunnel floor cracked, a wall of force slammed down the center path, and the enemy team rushed in. Thorn charged first, spear blazing, trying to force Eira and Luke away from the opening. Luke fired a bolt that struck Thorn squarely in the shoulder plate, making the armored man stagger just long enough for Sarah to pull Eira back from a second strike. Eira spun, drew her blade, and blocked a heavy spear blow that sent a sharp shiver up her arms. Vance moved like a shadow at her side, and Lady Raven watched the clash with a cold and measured gaze, not wasting energy on anything she did not need to control. Victor spoke only one line, quiet and satisfied, saying that the city no longer had a master, so it deserved one. That was when the old keeper did something none of them expected. He stepped into the glowing seam, pressed his palm to the stone, and revealed a hidden mark beneath his sleeve, a mark that proved he had not merely studied the Guardian. He had helped build part of its chamber systems long ago, and he had hidden the last passage on purpose. The revelation stunned even Eira, because the old man was not only a guide. He was one of the final living witnesses of Greyhaven itself. The chamber floor suddenly dipped, and the entire lower shaft opened into a massive circular descent lined with broken rails, blue fire veins, and hanging iron chains. Below them, far beneath the city, the shape of the next chamber could be seen in glowing layers of metal and stone, and the pulse of the Crown Corps throbbed like a hidden drum. Eira felt that pulse answer something inside her, and for a moment she understood why the Guardian had reacted to her touch before. The machine was not simply waiting for a master. It was waiting for a choice. The builders had designed it with a buried truth, one that the old keeper now explained while they ran. The Crown Corps could not be held safely by greed alone, because it searched for intent as much as command. If the heart sensed fear and hunger, it would lash out. If it sensed protection and resolve, it would steady itself. That meant the first person to reach it might not be the only one who mattered. It meant the heart could reject a thief. It also meant Eira, who had entered Greyhaven only to uncover the truth of her past, was now the only one in the group who had already proven she could calm part of the giant without forcing it. This was the twist that changed the race. Victor had expected a simple seizure of power, but the Guardian was not a blind machine. It could judge the hand that touched it, and that made every step more dangerous for everyone. The enemy surged again, and the old shaft trembled with the force of the moving giant below, while Eira, Luke, Sarah, and the old keeper rushed downward toward the core chamber, forced to fight for every step. Above them, Vance and Lady Raven followed with patient malice. Thorn drove forward in open fury, and Victor smiled like a man who still believed he could solve any living thing with enough control. Eira kept running, her breath sharp, her cloak flying behind her because she now understood the real struggle. She was not just trying to stop the wrong people. She was becoming the one person the buried heart might finally trust, and that made her both the key and the target as Greyhaven opened wider beneath their feet. The descent ended at a wide platform of cracked black stone, where cold wind moved through iron ribs set into the walls. Ahead, an inner bridge extended toward a vast round door plated in dark metal and silver seams, and every inch of it hummed with the same blue light that had pulsed through the shaft. The crown core chamber was near enough now that everyone could feel its heat through the stone, and the air smelled like dust, old oil, and storm water. Eira slowed only long enough to look back at her companions. Luke was pale but steady, his brown hair messy with ash, his green eyes fixed on the path ahead. Sarah stood close to him, red hair tied back, her caring face tense but clear, because she knew the next choice could save people or trap them all. The old keeper raised one shaking finger toward the door and warned them that once it opened, the Guardian might rise far enough to tear through the city above. That meant the people still trapped in Greyhaven would be in even greater danger if the wrong command was spoken. Eira heard that warning and felt her resolve harden. She had started this journey unsure of herself, but now she understood that courage was not the same as power. Courage was choosing to protect people even when the weight of the choice was too large to carry alone. She set one hand on the ward blade hilt at her side, and the Stormglass threads answered with a faint glow, as if the weapon already knew what the others still refused to admit. Behind her, the enemy footsteps echoed closer, and the great door ahead began to open a little wider, revealing a brighter blue light beyond it. Eira took one step forward toward the crown core, not as a lost wanderer anymore, but as someone ready to face the heart of Greyhaven, while the war for the buried giant moved into its next terrible breath. The great door of Greyhaven groaned wider, and cold blue light spilled across the cracked stone floor. Eira stood at the edge of it, with her silver hair lit from below and her tired blue eyes fixed on the glow ahead. Around her, the lower shaft of the ruined capital felt deep and ancient, with broken arches overhead, drifting ash in the air, and old stone walls that seemed to breathe with the weight of buried secrets. Behind her, heavy footsteps still moved through the dark passage, and the sound told her that Vance, Lady Raven, Thorn, and Victor were not far away. Eira had been running for too long, and she had survived too many lies to stay uncertain now. The central problem was clear in her mind at last. If the crown core was taken, the living mech under Greyhaven would be controlled by the wrong hands, and the whole broken kingdom could be turned into a weapon. That was why the ward blade at her side mattered so much, because the strange Stormglass threads in its black hilt had begun to answer her touch, and that meant the weapon was waking to her will. She took one careful step forward, and the blue glow grew stronger, as if the city itself had been waiting for her choice. Luke came up beside her first, low and alert, with his brown hair damp from the ash and his green eyes always watching the dark behind them. He was a cautious man, a loyal man, and he had stayed with Eira because he believed the truth mattered more than fear. Sarah followed him, her red hair tied back under her gray shawl, her healer satchel tight against her side, and her kind face tense with worry. She wanted to keep everyone alive long enough to see the end of this nightmare, and that made her more brave than she ever gave herself credit for. The old keeper waited just behind them, thin and grave, his white hair hanging around a weathered face that carried far too many secrets. He had guided them into the lower shaft, but every time he looked toward the crown core, his eyes seemed full of regret. He had once served the hidden machine, and he had hidden the truth because he feared what greedy leaders would do if they found it first. Eira turned to him and asked the question that had been burning inside her since the journey began. "Why did you never tell us the crown core could wake the whole giant?" The old keeper lowered his gaze and answered in a rough voice that seemed to scrape against the stone. "Because the giant does not follow noble words, it follows command. Once the ward blade is accepted, the core will listen, and then every hand that reaches for it will change the fate of Greyhaven." That was the first hard truth of the night, and it hit them all in silence. They were not simply chasing a treasure. They were standing at the edge of a force that could either defend the city or crush it under careless command. The glow ahead widened, and the door finally opened enough to reveal the chamber beyond. It was a vast hollow space beneath the cathedral, built in rings of black iron and cracked stone, and at the center of it sat the crown core in a dark housing of ancient metal. Gold and blue light pulsed inside it like a living heart, slow and steady, and every pulse sent a faint tremor through the floor. Towering fragments of the giant surrounded it, including the sentinel arm on one side with its shield plate and blue energy lines, and the forged legs on the other with their bronze joints and heavy armored shape. The pieces looked asleep but not dead, and that was what made the chamber feel so dangerous. The old keeper explained in short, careful words that the giant had once protected Greyhaven from outside armies, but the kingdom had fallen long before the creature could be fully restored. Then came the twist that changed the room. He confessed that the ward blade had not been made to rule the giant for any king. It had been forged to choose a single bearer of restraint, someone who would only awaken the machine when there was no other choice. Eira stared at the black hilt at her side, and for the first time she understood why the blade had resisted so many hands before hers. It was not craving power, it was testing character. At that same moment, another sound rolled through the chamber, sharp and cold, and everyone turned as Vance stepped into the blue light with Lady Raven and Thorn behind him, while Victor emerged from the shadowed arch on the other side. Vance wore his polished red-black demon armor with calm pride, his black hair neat, his sharp red eyes fixed on the core with cruel patience. He wanted the machine because he believed strength belonged to whoever could seize it, and he wanted Greyhaven because control meant victory in the wider war. Lady Raven entered like a blade wrapped in silk, her long black hair falling over a smooth silver gown with dark armor accents and raven feather decorations. Her gray eyes held a cold, superior smile, and she looked at Eira as if she were already beneath her. Thorn came next, broad-shouldered and furious, his short brown hair and scarred face lit by the fire lines in his horned infernal knight armor, while his burning spear crackled in his grip. He wanted revenge, and he wanted the giant because he thought raw force would finally let him crush every rival. Victor followed them in a dark mage cloak covered in red rune patterns, his white hair shining under the blue glow and his cold gray eyes already measuring every exit. He was smug and calculating, and he had spent this entire journey looking for the one moment when the core would be easiest to steal. The enemy had not arrived by accident. They had tracked the same rumors, followed the same broken maps, and now they had come to claim the heart of Greyhaven before anyone else could stop them. The chamber became a battlefield in a single breath. Thorn rushed first, driving forward with his burning spear, while Luke snapped his crossbow up and fired to force him back. Sarah pulled Eira behind a broken iron pillar and shouted for everyone to keep low, because the blue energy around the core was beginning to stir. Victor raised one hand, and red runes flashed through the air in a sharp circle, trying to lock the chamber doors and trap them all inside. Lady Raven did not rush like the others. She moved with smooth, careful steps, using the confusion to get closer to the crown core, because she believed subtle control was stronger than open force. Eira felt the ward blade vibrate at her side, and then the Stormglass threads glowed brighter, almost like a heartbeat answering the core. She drew the blade and saw the black hilt shine with thin lines of pale blue. The old keeper shouted that the weapon was reacting because the giant had recognized a true choice. Eira did not fully understand the rule, but she understood enough. If she let fear guide her, the blade would remain silent. If she chose to protect others instead of chase power, it would awaken. So she stepped out from cover and raised the ward blade toward the crown core. The blue light surged at once. The sentinel arm moved first with a deep metallic groan, lifting its shield and forcing Thorn back in a shower of sparks. Then the forged legs shifted, heavy joints locking into place as the chamber floor shook beneath their weight. The giant was waking, and the enemy did not expect it. Vance's calm expression finally cracked just for a moment as the machine answered Eira instead of him. That small crack told the whole truth about him. He had never wanted Greyhaven for its people, and he had never cared about the buried giant as a protector. He wanted the crown core because he feared any future he could not control, and that fear had turned into cruelty. Lady Raven saw the same thing and moved with sudden anger, her superior smile fading as she realized the core was rejecting her will. She shouted for Victor to force the door, and Victor answered by calling more red runes into the air, trying to bind the chamber to his spell pattern. But the ward blade responded again, and blue energy raced through the giant fragments, breaking his hold in bright shards. Eira felt the pull in her arm and understood that the weapon was not making her stronger for pride. It was linking her to every part of the machine, asking her to guide its first true movement. The guardian that had slept beyond the core room began to rise as well, its heavy iron plating scraping stone, its massive limbs unfolding like an ancient tower protector coming back to life. Its blue lines lit in sequence from shoulder to wrist, then across the chest and down the legs, and the whole chamber filled with the sound of metal waking after centuries of silence. Thorn roared and lunged again, but the Guardian swung its shield arm down and forced him off balance, driving him into a broken column. Luke and Sarah moved together at Eira's side, with Luke covering the open lanes and Sarah pulling anyone wounded away from the spinning debris. The battle was no longer just about the weapon or the core. It was about whether the giant would protect Greyhaven or be chained to greed. Then the deepest revelation of all arrived, quiet but sharp. The old keeper stepped forward into the blue light and admitted that he had once worked with the builders who sealed the crown core beneath the cathedral. He had helped hide it after the kingdom leaders turned on each other, because they were already arguing over who would own the giant before they had even repaired it. He had carried the guilt of that choice for years, and he had led Eira here because he believed she might be the first person in a long time who could place duty above ambition. Eira heard those words while the Guardian held the enemy back, and something inside her changed. She was no longer the frightened runner who had stumbled through ash and ruin. She was the one the blade had chosen to trust. With a steady breath, she planted her boots on the stone, lowered her shoulders, and sent her will through the ward blade into the crown core. The glow of the core deepened, and the chamber answered with a rolling pulse that pushed Victor back, forced Lady Raven to shield her eyes, and made Vance take a hard step away from the platform. But the awakening was not complete. More of the giant still lay hidden beyond the chamber, and the blue light now pointed toward a deeper path beneath Greyhaven, where greater power and greater danger still waited. Eira looked that way, then glanced once at Luke, Sarah, and the old keeper, and she saw trust where fear had been. The giant had stirred, the enemy had been driven back for the moment, and the true heart of Greyhaven had opened its next door. Yet the war was not over, because the shadow of the buried machine stretched even farther down, into a place none of them had reached yet, and the next step would decide whether the city could be saved or lost. Greyhaven lay beneath a storm-dark sky, broken marble glowing faintly with ash and blue light. The city felt quiet for one terrible moment, but everyone there knew the silence was only waiting to break. Eira stood at the open shaft entrance, and the others gathered close, because the buried machine below was the last hope for the city and the last danger in it. Eira was a young woman with silver hair and tired blue eyes, and she had become the one person who would not turn away. Luke, a cautious man with brown hair and alert green eyes, stayed near her with his crossbow ready, because he trusted her even when fear pulled hard at his heart. Sarah, a kind woman with red hair and steady hands, watched the wounded and held their courage together. The old keeper, a thin man with white hair and a grave face, finally spoke the truth, saying he had hidden this place because the crown core could wake a guardian or a conqueror, and he had feared the wrong hands for years. Then Victor came from the shadows with his white hair and cold gray eyes, smiling as if the whole ruin already belonged to him. Lady Raven, a woman with long black hair and gray eyes, stepped beside him in her silver gown and called the guardian a tool that should kneel to power. Vance, a man with black hair and sharp red eyes, held his calm, cruel stare, while Thorn, broad-shouldered and scarred, lifted his burning spear and promised to break anyone in their way. They all wanted the same thing, control of the ward blade and the machine beneath the cathedral, because they believed Greyhaven should serve their rule forever. When the final path opened, the Guardian rose from the darkness in heavy iron plating, blue lines glowing across its body like a waking star. The battle shook the lower shaft, and the sentinel arm and forge legs answered the ward blade before Victor could seize them. Eira saw the truth in that instant. The machine was not a weapon for conquest, but a protector that rejected greed. She reached the crown core, placed her hand upon its light, and chose trust over fear. The core answered her, the Guardian turned on the invaders, and Victor was driven back as the sealed door slammed shut behind them. As the dust settled, Greyhaven still stood, battered but alive. The old keeper bowed his head, at last free of his secret. Luke smiled with relief, Sarah began tending the shaken survivors, and Eira looked at the dawn above the ruins with new strength. She had entered the dark as a ranger fighting for one city, but she rose from it as its true guardian, ready for whatever waited beyond the next door.